Welcome back to Learn an Effing Language. I'm Ryan Olke, and in today's video, I'm going to share with you key tips on how to start learning a language today. So whether you've had learning a language collecting dust and cobwebs on your bucket list, or whether you've just been stuck in your process for a long time, these tips will help you get going, to stick with it, and to see results very quickly. So let's do it.
OK，
跟他说让沙发回把这个飞度支
So I'm going to give you all these tips fairly quickly, but I'll have more videos going into depth into each one of these tips in the future in my channel. So don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, share this video if it's helpful for you, or if you have friends who are also wanting to start learning a language. So the first thing I recommend you do is to decide on the level of fluency you want to achieve in the language that you're studying. Too many people take an all or nothing approach. Either you think that you don't speak the language at all, or you think that you have to achieve full fluency, that you speak like a native, that you don't ever make errors. And that's a fine goal to have, but that's not the only level of fluency. There are several levels and degrees of fluency, and it's much better, more encouraging to take that approach to your language learning process than all or nothing. So one of the most common used models of fluency in the world of language learning is from Europe, and it's called the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, or CEFR. And they have 6 levels of fluency. They're all very easy to understand here, and I'll show you the Wikipedia page for this. But they have 3 types of users and 6 levels of fluency. So the first level is a basic user, which would be really useful for traveling, for example. So you'll be able to ask questions about really important facts and information, like where's the bathroom and how much does this thing cost. You won't be able to have conversations, but you will be a user of the language. And I really like that this model uses that term user, because if you know anything in the language, you are now a user of that language. The question is just at what level or what degree, what type of user are you, and what kind of user would you like to be? Now, an independent user of a language can have conversations. And this is really interesting because this is not the highest level of fluency at all. This is intermediate. But an intermediate, independent user of language can have conversations. You'll make errors, you won't know certain vocabulary, but you can actually have a conversation with a native speaker, and that's really, really exciting. And an interesting fact here is that most polyglots, people who speak several languages, will often consider the 4th level of fluency, the B2 level of an independent user, to be their level of what they would consider fluent. So if they say that they're fluent in a language, they might be just referencing this B2 level. And last, we have the proficient user, and this is the type of user that people typically think about when they think about learning a language, that they have to be a proficient user, somebody who's really advanced and experienced in the language, that hardly ever makes any errors, that understands all the grammar of a language. But you do not need to make this your goal. In fact, I would guess that most people would feel incredibly proud of themselves if they reached an independent user level. But you have to think that way from the very beginning. You have to think in these terms, that you're making your way through different levels of being a user of that language, and decide for yourself what would be most satisfying, what would help you reach your particular goals in your life for the way that you want to use that language. And if you do this, you'll be so much more encouraged throughout your whole language learning journey. You'll feel that you're actually making progress versus a negative cycle of thinking that you still have so far to go. Next tip, focus on vocabulary over grammar. First off, grammar is very difficult up front, especially if you're totally brand new to a language, and vocabulary is so much more useful to you as a beginner, and you're gonna feel so much more confidence because you're gonna be making progress because you know how to memorize vocabulary. You don't need to have any explanation, you don't need any rules, you just need to know what the word means and memorize it. And then you can start actually using it immediately. And I know this might sound a little strange, but if, for example, in my native language, English, a person doesn't need to conjugate any verbs, they don't need to know any grammar. They could say something to me like, hungry, need, eat, food, where. And so all this is out of order, there's no conjugations, but I understand what they need. They're hungry and they want to know where some food is. So right from the beginning, you can communicate with just simple words. And so that's why vocabulary is really useful. Plus, again, because you know how to memorize vocabulary, you can memorize, for example, 10 words in your first day and then 10 more words in your second day, and you've doubled your vocabulary in 2 days. In a month, you could learn 300 words, 400 words, 500 words. Now, you can totally focus on some grammar from the very beginning. However, I just recommend that you focus maybe 70 to 90% on just learning vocabulary and memorizing key phrases that would be useful as a beginner. And for grammar, you can pick up one grammar book so you can start learning some of the rules, you can find example sentences, but grammar can be really tough up front, and often it's better learned in context in actual conversations. But if you start with vocabulary, you're going to gain confidence, you're going to feel that you can actually learn the language, which will give you even more confidence to start tackling grammar, which can be intimidating up front. So don't feel like you have to focus all on grammar up front, because that'll be really demoralizing. So again, about 70 to 90% on vocabulary up front, and when you feel confident enough in vocabulary to maybe change it up and start spending even more time in grammar, then you can do that later when you feel ready. Next is to focus on common, concrete, easy to visualize vocabulary. Okay, so not just any vocabulary, but first common vocabulary. So there's really well-established research that says the most common 1,000 words in a language covers about 85% of speech. So that's really interesting. So you only need 1,000 words to understand and participate in 85% of the conversations you encounter in daily life. And 4,000 to 5,000 will cover 95%. It's really useful to know which vocabulary would be most useful and most common up front. In addition to focusing on the most common vocabulary of a language, it's also useful to focus on the common vocabulary of your life, your interests. So if you're interested in gardening or meditation, you can focus on learning that vocabulary because it's common for you in your life and it's what's really interesting to you. Same thing with your family life, your community, your job. So I encourage you to also include vocabulary that you actually use in your daily life. And then I encourage you to ignore everything else, okay? So if it doesn't fall on the list of the most 1,000 common words in your language, if it's not common in your life, you can completely ignore that vocabulary. So for example, if giraffe and bulldozer are not common words in the language that you're learning and it's not common in your life, there's no need for you to have a vocabulary card for giraffe or bulldozer. Okay, so you'll never need to use the sentence, for example, there's a giraffe driving a bulldozer. You don't need to memorize that sentence. It's not useful. Now the verb to drive might be useful, but giraffe and bulldozer, for a lot of people, probably not. In addition to focusing on common vocabulary, I encourage you to focus on things that are concrete and easy to visualize. So words like about, of, and from, those are really abstract in English and they're hard to visualize. You can't visualize a thing to represent them. And so they're gonna be hard to memorize. And then if they're hard to memorize, you might feel discouraged because the process isn't going well. But instead you could focus on things that are concrete and easy to visualize, like house or car, walking, running, eating, drinking, things like that. All of those things are common, they're concrete, and you can visualize the thing or the action happening. And yes, you can memorize verbs without worrying about conjugation, which is really, for me, more about grammar. So you can memorize verbs, for example, like to eat and to walk. And you can just remember what they are without having to conjugate them. So like in Spanish, comer y caminar, and you can just memorize that that's what they mean. And you can trust that you will learn the conjugations over time with practice. You can also give yourself permission to just memorize phrases even if you don't understand the grammar. For example, where's the bathroom? How much does it cost? How are you? You can just memorize these phrases without understanding the grammar. And that can be really useful, especially as a basic user of a language. So, in Tibetan, I kind of remember the phrase to ask, how are you? I only learned a little bit of colloquial Tibetan. And that phrase is "Kyaron kusu dewo yimbe." And I messed it up a little bit, there's some tones in there. But if I say that to a Tibetan, they're gonna smile and tell me how they're doing. And maybe I won't understand the response, but hey, I know that phrase and I could learn more if I wanted to. So how do you actually go about learning vocabulary in your new language? Well, first I encourage you to, as much as possible, eliminate your own native language. So if you're focusing on common, concrete, easy to visualize words and verbs and phrases, then you will not need to have your native language. So for example, in Spanish, if I have a book here and I tell you that the word for this book is libro, all you need to do is see this and think libro. And that's it. You don't have to see the book, think in your head book, and then think in your head libro, or think libro, that means book, okay, it's a book. No, just libro, that's it. And so that will help you to actually learn the vocabulary, memorize it quicker, and be able to use it much more quickly than if you're continually translating in your head from your native language to the language you're learning. So obviously, in order to do this, you're gonna have to use images with your vocabulary cards. You're not going to have on one side of the card the word book in English, for example, and on the other side, libro. You're going to have on one side a picture of a book, and on the other side, the word libro, and that's it. It can also be helpful to have audio of a native speaker, especially if you're brand new to a language and you're still learning what the sounds are like. You can have a recording of a native speaker, and I'm going to get to applications in a minute that help you do this easily without creating extra work for you. And now recommendations for how to find the vocabulary. One is the awesome word list from Fluent Forever. Now they actually have a new application I'm going to talk about in a minute that's really awesome for language learning, but they still have on the site these awesome word lists available for $10 each and for many of the most popular languages that people are learning. And these word lists have 600 words. They're really common, they're easy to visualize, they're grouped into themes so you can kind of connect them easier in your mind. You can download a PDF, and you can download audio recordings of each of the words being spoken by a native speaker. So incredibly useful. You can just pay 10 bucks, download the list, and get going with memorizing and learning new vocabulary. You can also find frequency dictionaries online. Many of the most popular languages have frequency dictionaries on Amazon, for example, and sometimes you can find them online on websites for free. People have created these lists. And you can find them, for example, the most common 2,000 words, 5,000 words, or up to even 10,000 words. And then last, you can find themed dictionaries online. And these books group vocabulary into themes. So shopping, traveling, work, going out with friends and having fun. And that's a really awesome, useful way to learn new vocabulary. Now, for applications for language learning, and especially for memorizing vocabulary, I would strongly encourage you to actually use an application, to not just use paper and pen or note cards and a pencil or a pen. You can totally do that if it works for you. If you feel really happy doing that, go ahead. But really, it creates a lot of extra work, and it's not the most effective way to learn, because research has shown that spaced repetition learning is much more effective. So I'm not going to get into this system right now in this video, but basically it's an amazing algorithm to help you review note cards, review vocabulary at the exact time your brain needs it. So if you can imagine for a minute here that you have 1,000 flashcards, how do you decide which flashcards you're going to study today? Are you going to try to study all 1,000 cards? That's going to take a really long time. Are you just going to guess which words you think you need to study the most, which are hard, and which ones are easy subjectively? Well, a spaced repetition system will do that hard work for you, and the result basically is that you study more efficiently, you require less study time, and it's going to be much more effective. You will memorize and learn that vocabulary much more easily. So the first application I want to recommend is the Fluent Forever application. It's fantastic. It has everything you need for language learning without you having to think about planning or what you should be doing. It has spaced repetition learning in there. It has the most common words for the language. It has pronunciation training in it. It has grammar sentences for you to learn grammar over time. It currently has 10 languages, and they're adding languages all the time. So they have a free trial, and then it ranges from $7 to $10 a month. So really, really affordable, and a fantastic power-packed application for your language learning. The next application is LingQ. It's one that I've experimented with a little bit, and I really am excited to use it with new languages that I'll be learning this year. LingQ has a lot packed into it, but what stands out to me is that it has a bunch of content imported into the library, and you can import your own content in there. And when you read and listen to content, the application learns what words you already know and which words you need to learn. And from the words that you don't know, it will create flashcards automatically for you, including using a spaced repetition learning system. So it's totally free to use, but they do have some paid upgrades that range between $8 and $13 a month. So I highly recommend you check that out. So the last application I want to recommend to you is Anki. It's incredibly popular amongst hardcore language learners, but it's a much more DIY application, but it has a lot of powerful customization. It's completely free to use. I'll link to a few articles and tutorials here, and at some point I'll create a tutorial covering how to use Anki, but there's lots of good tutorials already out there. So last, I want to mention Duolingo simply because I don't recommend it. Now, that's not to say that you're not going to learn anything using Duolingo, but there's a lot of actual evidence and a lot of experiments that language learning YouTubers have done where they've used Duolingo for a very long time and seen very little progress when it comes down to using the language in life in a conversation. They've completed all the lessons that are available, and then they go to have a conversation and can't have barely a beginner level of conversation. So it's simply just not effective and efficient. So I personally don't recommend it. But that being said, there are a lot of wonderful applications out there, too many to put into one video, but Fluent Forever application, LingQ, and Anki are the three that I highly, highly recommend you check out to support your language learning journey. Next, I want to encourage you to practice learning the sounds of your language. Now, the reason why I'm recommending this is not actually so you can sound like a native speaker. That is really cool, and that's a great goal to have. But actually, it's to make your learning process easier. So when you're learning new vocabulary, there is also sound involved, literally when you're saying the word out loud or when you're hearing that word. But also, even in your mind, there's sounds associated with it. And if you can remove this kind of speed bump of tripping up over the sound, you'll be able to just simply focus on the learning, not both the learning and then, oh, this sounds and feels kind of weird when I hear it or when I try to say it. And so this will also help you obviously understand a native speaker when they're speaking to you. So for example, you could know every single word a native speaker is saying to you, but because you have a hard time identifying the words via their sounds, you will then not understand them. So obviously, one, learning the sounds of the language will help you actually learn the language. It'll make the process easier, but when things are easier, we feel more confident and we feel like we're making progress. So I encourage you to spend a few weeks or a month as part of your language learning process, one of the things you're doing, to be learning the sounds of the language and to practicing them by themselves. There are a few ways you can do that. You can go to forvo.com where there are hundreds of thousands of recordings of native speakers pronouncing words and phrases. So you can go there, press play, and you can even download the audio files right to your computer, totally free to use. You can also check out the application HelloTalk, which is totally free to use, and there are tons of language learners online, and you can record yourself speaking sentences and get feedback from native speakers on how you can improve. So totally free to use, really, really handy. Now, as I mentioned, the Fluent Forever app includes pronunciation training for every language that they have on there. So if you sign up for Fluent Forever, they will include pronunciation training automatically. And if you're more of a DIY person and you want to use the Anki application, you can also purchase pronunciation trainer decks from Fluent Forever, and they're really cheap. I think about $10 each. I love their pronunciation trainers. I've already used them for a few languages, and I went ahead and actually purchased most of them for the future for when I get to all the rest of the languages. Now, along with pronunciation, if the script of your language is incredibly radically different from your own native language, you might find it useful to also spend time learning the script, learning how to write and read the letters and the words. Now, there is debate out there. Some people say that you don't need to do that or you shouldn't worry about that up front, but it may be something that you want to do. And if so, there are going to be lots of resources online, books and applications that will help you learn how to read and write the language. Now, my last tip is probably the most important, honestly, and that is to take private lessons with a native speaker or do a language exchange with a native speaker. Now, if you're only going to do one of these things, I highly recommend you take private lessons with a native speaker. And the reason is because they can guide you through everything. They can give you lesson structure, they can give you homework assignments, they can answer any of your questions you have, and you can practice speaking immediately and get helpful guidance and corrections right there in your lessons. And for private lessons, I highly recommend iTalki. They have most every language you can think of on there. It's super easy to use. There are so many wonderful teachers on there. I've worked with several myself, and the lessons are really affordable. Most languages you can find lessons in between, say, $8 and $15 an hour. It depends. Some languages are going to be more expensive, but the vast majority of them, from what I've seen, are in that range. So really, really affordable as far as language learning goes. And if you're going to sign up for iTalki, you can use my link below in the description, and that'll give you $10 free to use on iTalki. So basically, you're gonna get a free lesson just by clicking on the link. So nothing to lose there. Hop on iTalki, find your language, find a teacher, and give it a go and see what happens, see how you like it. And now for language exchanges, it's pretty simple. You find a person who speaks the language you're learning, and they are also learning your native language, and you help each other learn each other's languages. Pretty simple, and you can do this totally for free. So on iTalki, they actually have the option to find language exchanges as well. And then with HelloTalk, the application I've already mentioned, they have the possibility for language exchanges there as well. So even without spending any money, you can find the opportunity to get help from a native speaker. And I highly recommend you do it. To just learn on your own without ever receiving input and help and guidance from a native speaker is so much more painful and difficult. It's so much more enjoyable to work with native speakers. And you can start using the language today. You don't have to wait. Just like we talked about with fluency levels, if you start learning the language today, you are now a basic user of the language. And the last thing I want to say is that do whatever makes you happy, even if it's opposite of what I've told you. So if you are enjoying your language learning process, you're loving your experience, if you feel really happy about the progress you're making, you don't necessarily have to change anything. You might want to modify or evolve the process you're using right now just to have it be more effective or efficient, but only do so if you're feeling frustrated with the process that you're going through and if you're feeling like you're not making progress. If that's the case, then I think a lot of the tips I've given you today will help you change your experience rapidly and see more progress in a shorter period of time. So, what language are you learning? What methods are you using to learn the language? And where do you need help? Where can I help you? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll be creating more videos going into more depth on hands-on techniques for language learning to help you in your language learning journey. So if you found this video helpful, I would sure appreciate you hitting the like button, share this video with all of your friends who are learning languages, and hit the subscribe button so you get notified when I have new videos out to help you with your language learning. So until next time, happy language learning, and see you in the next video.